All right, my friends, welcome back, and it is breaking news day. So I just saw this article this morning, and Wednesday in Glasgow, 30 national governments and at least 6 major automobile manufacturers have signed a pledge to work towards phasing out sales of new gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles by 2040 worldwide and 2035 in, quote, leading markets. This is not a big surprise, honestly. Let's face it. We've been talking about EVs for years, and manufacturers like General Motors have come out and said, by like 2035, we're going to be all EV or the majority of EV. I think Ford worded it as they're going to be electric vehicles in major markets and working that way in emerging markets, something like that. But what's interesting to me is not who signed it, but who didn't. So I'm going to provide a link below so you can check this out. This is actually from the gov.uk website, okay? And this combined nations, states, emerging nations, cities, lenders, and automobile manufacturers to sign this pledge, which is absolutely not binding, right, in any way, shape, or form, that they are, yes, working towards an EV future, a zero emissions measured at the tailpipe. It's very interesting how they worded that, of course, because they have to recognize the power supplies for the electric grid around the world. Now, what's interesting to me is first off, is that the governments are going to work towards zero emissions by 2040 or earlier, and no later than by 2035 in leading markets. And cities, states, and regional governments are going to work towards converting their owned and leased vehicle van fleets to zero emissions by 2035, as well as putting in policies to enable, accelerate, or otherwise incentivize the transition to zero emission vehicles. Manufacturers are going to start working towards 100% zero emission new car and van sales in leading markets by 2035 or earlier. Business fleet owners are going to work towards 100% by 2030. Investors are going to be, of course, contributing to this and supporting it, and financial institutions will be providing the lending and the financial programs that allow manufacturers to move forward to this. And there's some pretty big names in here. The United Kingdom, Norway, Ireland, Canada, Austria, for example, and then major powerhouses like Rwanda also signed on. What really jumps out here is two things about the number of countries, or the countries who signed it, is India signed it, which is the 4th largest market in the world. And in the release here, it says 2-wheel and 3-wheelers constitute more than 70% of global sales and more than 80% in India. All governments should support the transition of these light vehicles to zero emission. It's interesting that while this overall is talking about vehicles, they specify in India 2 and 3 wheels. I assume they also mean cars in India, but that's probably the biggest one there, at least in terms of the market and the number of vehicles sold. So what jumps out at you here, China, the US, and Japan, the top 3, nowhere to be seen. Now, once you get into it, you'll notice when I mentioned UK, Ireland, and Australia was not mentioned. Well, that's because different provinces in Australia, like here's Victoria and here's South Australia, they signed it independently. So it wasn't the Australian government, it was apparently the different territories or provinces signed it. Interestingly, Canada signed on, but then British Columbia signed on as well. Here in America, we had Los Angeles, Charleston, South Carolina, Dallas, New York, Atlanta, Ann Arbor. None of the big surprises there. They all signed on to it. San Francisco, Seattle, for example. They all signed on to it as well. Now, the manufacturers involved, I'll provide a list to all of those signees here. You'll see that scrolling by while we talk. And then I'll also provide the list here of the manufacturers who actually signed on to it. Ford and General Motors, Jaguar Land Rover, Mercedes, and Volvo are the big names we would hear in the U.S. BYD Auto is a big name over in China. It's interesting to see their name on there as well. There's a bunch of fleet owners that signed up, a bunch of investors who signed up. But then financial institutions, this one jumped out at me. There's two, Aviva and NatWest. This is another one of those, it's more notable who didn't sign it. Of all the other financial institutions in the world, I mean, think of Bank of America. Where the heck are they? Why is it only these two? And I don't even know who these two are. So very, very interesting. And then a bunch of other signatories who I think are just related to the automobile industry. So the end result here is there's no bombshell, is what it boils down to. This is not a surprise. The auto manufacturers have already moved that way. You know, they're going to be working with their financial people. The governments obviously want it and are putting in place some policies to either force moving that way, like California, or to support moving that way, like our new infrastructure bill here in the U.S., where they're going to be building a recharging network, they say. This is not a big surprise. It just looks like a meeting of the minds, and signing a piece of paperwork said, yes, we're all willing to work together. Interesting, but it's interesting who didn't join in. I mean, China, Japan, and the U.S. not committing to anything, and honestly, China and Japan are the ones that surprised me a little bit. And then big manufacturers, Honda, Toyota, Mitsubishi, nowhere to be seen. Very, very interesting to me, especially for Toyota, with their investment in hybrid technology, their investment in alternative fuel sources. They continue to remain very quiet about their plans for an EV future. I could stop the video there, but I want to say we've heard little bits and pieces of what Toyota's working on behind the scenes. And we know that they surprised everybody with the Prius and its technology. And in a lot of cases, manufacturers decided, like Ford, to not compete with Toyota, just to license their technology. Don't you get the feeling that Toyota is, as the largest manufacturer, as a worldwide manufacturer, a world leader, that they're sitting on something and they're waiting to kind of drop a bombshell on everybody? That's all for today. I just wanted to bring this up to you. I wanted to let you know what was going on. I thought it was pretty cool, and I thought it was cool who didn't sign on to it. Let me know your thoughts below. Thanks, guys.